Jesus had entered Jerusalem to the sound of praise, but he had not come as a ruler hungry for applause. He came as the son of David, the promised king, walking toward the cross with his eyes open and his heart burdened for a city that did not know the hour of its visitation. He had looked across the Kidron Valley at Jerusalem, shining under its temple crown, and had wept aloud over it, because he saw past the white stone to a people surrounded by religion and blind to the God who had come to them. Mark preserves a detail of timing that the other Gospels pass over, and it changes how we read everything that follows. On the evening of the triumphal entry, Jesus went into the temple and looked round about upon all things, and then, because the hour was late, he returned to Bethany with the 12. The cleansing came the next morning. Whatever happened in those courts, it was not the eruption of a man overcome in the moment. Jesus had inspected his Father's house, slept on what he had seen, and walked back into the city the following day, knowing exactly what he intended to do. The judgment that fell on the temple market was deliberate. What he had seen the evening before filled the court of the Gentiles, the vast outer enclosure of Herod's temple, an expanse of some 35 acres, colonnaded round with porticos. That court carried a sacred purpose all its own, because it was the one place a foreigner could come to seek the God of Israel. Gentiles could go no further in, past the barrier wall whose inscriptions warned them off on pain of death. But they could stand in the outer court and pray, which meant that court was the temple's open door to the nations. By the final week of Jesus' ministry, the noise of trade had swallowed it. Passover explains the scale of the commerce. Pilgrims had traveled for days and weeks from every corner of the Jewish world, bringing offerings and the annual half-shekel temple tax commanded in the law of Moses, and both requirements created business. The tax could be paid only in Tyrian silver, prized for the purity of its metal, so every pilgrim carrying Roman or provincial coin had to pass through the money changers who charged their fee on each exchange. There is a bitter irony in the arrangement, since the coin demanded for the house of the God of Israel bore the image of the pagan god of Tyre. Those who traveled far could not easily bring animals, so sellers of oxen, sheep, and doves supplied them at temple-approved standards and temple-inflated prices. The doves cut closest to the poor because the dove was the offering the law permitted to those who could not afford a lamb, the very offering Mary had brought to this temple at Jesus' own presentation as an infant. Jewish tradition itself remembered the market with disgust, for the bazaars in the temple precincts were associated with the house of Annas, the high priestly family, and later rabbis pronounced woes on that house for its greed. A system meant to serve the worshiper had learned to feed on him, and the profits ran upward into the hands of the men responsible for the sanctity of the place. Into this Jesus came, and Mark says he began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves. Nothing about it was private. Coins rang across the pavement, tables went over, the dove sellers scrambled from their benches, and the roar of commerce broke apart in the middle of Israel's religious life under the authority of one who called the temple his father's house. Mark adds that he would not suffer any man to carry a vessel through the temple, putting a stop to the traffic of porters who had turned the sacred courts into a shortcut between the city and the Mount of Olives. Even Jewish tradition recorded a rule against using the Temple Mount as a thoroughfare, a standard the daily crowds had evidently abandoned. Jesus made the people look again at where they were standing. Then he taught them, and his words reached back into the prophets. Is it not written, "My house shall be called of all nations the house of prayer"? But ye have made it a den of thieves. The sentence welds two texts together. The first half comes from Isaiah, from the promise that God would bring the sons of the stranger to his holy mountain and make them joyful in his house of prayer. And it is worth noticing that only Mark preserves the phrase of all nations, the very phrase that indicts what had been done to the Gentiles' court. The second half comes from Jeremiah's temple sermon, where the prophet stood at the gate of the first temple and asked whether the house called by God's name had become a den of robbers in the people's eyes, a hideout where men who practiced injustice all week came to feel safe behind sacred walls. Jeremiah's generation refused the warning and lost their temple to Babylon. Jesus set the same words against his own generation, in the same courts, with the same destruction, now a single generation away. His anger was righteous, but calling it anger says too little, because in that moment Jesus was defending several things at once. The worship the market had drowned, the poor the system had exploited, the nations the noise had crowded out, and the honor of his Father's name in the place where it had been handled most carelessly. John's Gospel, describing the earlier cleansing at the start of his ministry, tells us the disciples remembered the scripture, "The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up." And that same zeal from Psalm 69 still burned in him at the end. He did not attack the temple out of contempt for it. He honored its purpose more fiercely than the men who managed it, and love is what made him incapable of walking past its corruption. The leader's response tells us how deep the corruption ran. Men confronted with the prophets in their own courts should have trembled and searched their hearts. But Mark records that the scribes and chief priests heard it and sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all the people was astonished at his doctrine. The cleansing did not soften them, it exposed them. Every overturned table was a sign that judgment had entered the temple ahead of the cross, and the men whose income and authority depended on the system understood the sign perfectly. Matthew then adds the detail that transforms the whole scene. After the sellers were driven out, the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. Jesus had not emptied the courts to leave them silent. He cleared away the commerce so the broken could come near, and once the noise of greed was driven out, the cries of the wounded could finally be heard in the house built for exactly that purpose. People who had spent their lives at the edges of Israel's religious world found the Lord of the temple standing in its courts, receiving them. And for a brief and beautiful hour, the place looked like everything it had been built to be. Children were crying out in the courts as well, taking up the shout from the road, "Hosanna to the Son of David." Their voices carried the confession the leadership refused to make, and it displeased the chief priests and scribes enough that they demanded whether Jesus heard what the children were saying. He answered them from the 8th Psalm, "Yea, have ye never read, out of the mouth of babes and sucklings thou hast perfected praise." The men who held the knowledge, the office, and the authority stood offended in their own temple, while the children, the blind, and the lame recognized the king in front of them, and that contrast is among the sharpest in the entire final week. Need saw what expertise could not. Behind the confrontation stood something larger than a reform of temple practice. Jesus had already told his disciples that he would be delivered up, condemned, mocked, scourged, and crucified, and he had wept over the city because he knew the temple's days were numbered, its permanent-looking stones destined to be thrown down. The whole sacrificial system was approaching its crisis because within the week the Lamb of God would offer himself as the final sacrifice, and the house where pilgrims came with lambs would be surpassed by the one the lambs had always pointed toward. The leaders wanted to preserve the temple while rejecting the Son of God standing inside it, and they could have tolerated a teacher, perhaps even a miracle worker, so long as he left the system alone. He did not leave it alone because truth never leaves corruption alone, and their fear of his authority in the temple hardened into the resolve that carried him to the cross. Still, he kept teaching. Luke says he taught daily in the temple, while the chief priests and the scribes and the chief of the people sought to destroy him, and could not find what they might do, for all the people were very attentive to hear him. Picture those days, courts that still carried the memory of overturned tables, crowds pressing in to listen, and every word spoken under the shadow of men already arranging his death. He knew what was forming behind the official faces, and he stood in the open and taught anyway, because his hour was coming, and until it came he would speak the truth in his Father's house. The story has never stopped speaking, because the dangers it exposes were never confined to ancient Jerusalem. Worship can turn into business in any generation. Prayer can be buried under noise, and holy things can be pressed into the service of pride, control, or gain. And when that happens, God is not impressed by the building, the ceremony, or the size of the crowd. Jesus wanted his Father's house to be a house of prayer, because prayer is the language of dependence, the posture of a soul that admits God is the giver and we are the ones in need. And a marketplace spirit is its opposite, reducing everything sacred to transaction. The uncomfortable question the passage leaves with every reader is what Jesus would overturn in us, and what tables we have allowed to stand in space that belongs to prayer. Yet there is mercy folded into the judgment, and the healing of the blind and lame is the proof of it. Jesus does not expose corruption for the pleasure of destruction, but because something better is possible once the corruption falls. And the moment the sellers went out, the sufferers came in. To the leaders, he was a threat, and they judged him rightly, for he threatened their comfort, their revenue, and their false peace. To the broken who reached him in the cleared courts, he was healing, and to the children he was the son of David. And the difference between those verdicts was never a matter of evidence. It was a matter of the heart. The king who entered Jerusalem in humility entered the temple with authority. He wept over the city, cleansed his Father's house, healed the wounded in its courts, and taught the people daily while his enemies plotted in the shadows, and every step carried him nearer the cross while revealing more plainly who he was. Next time, Jesus and his disciples return toward Jerusalem. Along the road, Jesus approaches a fig tree covered with leaves, but finds no fruit upon it. What follows will become more than a lesson about a tree. It will stand as a warning against the appearance of faithfulness without the fruit God desires. Jesus cleansed the temple because his Father's house mattered, healed there because mercy mattered, and walked on toward the cross because salvation mattered more to him than his own safety. When the tables fell in the court of the Gentiles, the poor and the broken finally found room to come near. Just ask the blind and the lame who met him there.